You know that feeling when something just goes sideways, project fails, team drops the ball, maybe something personal just knocks you back, and that first thought is almost instant. Okay, who messed this up?
Oh yeah, it's like a reflex, isn't it? That immediate hunt for an external reason, someone or something else to blame.
Totally. And that instinct, that's exactly what we're tackling head on today. We're diving deep into a principle that was really forged under extreme pressure.
Hmm.
We're looking at the core ideas from the book Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, the former Navy SEAL officer.
That's right. And these aren't just battlefield lessons. We're pulling out how these ideas apply just as much in, say, business, team dynamics, or honestly, just facing challenges in your own life.
So our mission for you listening in is to cut through all that and get to the really impactful stuff. What does extreme ownership actually mean? And how can taking these principles seriously change how you lead, how you work in a team, or just how you handle your own hurdles? Let's get into it.
Okay, let's lay the groundwork. The absolute core idea, the bedrock of this whole thing, is that a leader has to accept, well, total responsibility for everything. Everything that happens in their world, especially anything impacting the mission.
Total. Really. I mean, what about stuff that genuinely feels outside your control? Budgets getting slashed, unexpected market changes, maybe a team member just not pulling their weight?
Especially those. The principle here is relentless. If someone's not performing, the leader failed to train them right or mentor them or maybe set clear expectations. If resources are an issue, the leader didn't plan for that contingency or communicate the need effectively enough up the chain.
So it really boils down to absolutely no excuses.
Zero. None. The source is really uncompromising on this. It's not about finding why something happened in a detached way. It's about finding your role as the leader in why it happened, owning it, and then driving the solution.
Okay, but here's where it gets interesting, right? It's not about the leader just falling on their sword.
No, not at all.
It's that when the leader owns it first, publicly, it changes the whole atmosphere. Suddenly, the team feels safer.
Exactly. They see the leader take the hit, which paradoxically makes it okay for them to take risks, to make decisions, and, yeah, to own up to their own mistakes without being terrified of blame.
It shifts from finger pointing to, like, collective problem solving.
Precisely. It fosters a culture of learning, but it has to start at the top. The leader needs to be willing to look in the mirror first.
And speaking of mirrors, there's that really provocative line in the source material, no bad teams, only bad leaders.
Oof, yeah, that one lands hard, especially if you've ever felt stuck with a team that just wasn't clicking. But the book backs it up. They use military examples where literally only the leadership changed. Same people, same gear, and team performance just skyrocketed.
So if your team's struggling, the first finger you point is inward.
That's the argument. Effective leaders don't just talk about high standards, they live them. And crucially, they actively invest in developing their people. Identifying strengths, sure, but also tackling weaknesses head-on, giving candid feedback. It's on the leader to build that team capability.
That really reframes things, doesn't it? It's less about who's the problem and more about how am I, as the leader, contributing to this situation.
Right, because owning the mission means owning the performance and development of everyone involved in achieving it.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit to the leader's own headspace. The mindset. Belief is huge here, according to the source. A leader has to believe in the mission.
Absolutely critical. If you don't genuinely buy into the goal, whether that's, a military objective or a product launch, you just won't have the grit to push through when things get tough. You won't take the calculated risks needed, and you certainly won't inspire that can-do confidence in your team.
And it's not just saying you believe it, right? It's how you act, your attitude, your willingness to make sacrifices. That's what people see and respond to.
Exactly. But then there's the flip side, the constant enemy, ego. The source pulls no punches, saying ego clouds and disrupts everything.
Everything. Like even basic planning or just taking advice.
Yep. Ego makes you defensive. You stop listening properly. You can't see your own flaws or admit you were wrong. It blocks learning.
So how do you walk that line? You need confidence to lead, obviously, but without letting ego take over.
It's a constant balancing act. It's about having confidence that comes from competence, from knowing your stuff, not just arrogance. It means actively looking for feedback, being willing to learn from anyone, junior or senior, and crucially, having the humility to say, I messed up, or I don't know, let's figure it out.
Checking your ego isn't weakness then, it's actually a strength.
Absolutely. It builds massive trust. It creates an environment where people feel safe to bring up problems or new ideas, which ultimately leads to better outcomes. It's always mission first, ego last.
Okay, so we have leaders owning everything, building their teams, believing in the cause, keeping ego in check. How does this translate into getting stuff done? The source mentions specific tactics, starting with teamwork, cover and move.
Yeah, cover and move is straight out of small unit tactics. One element advances while the other provides suppressive fire. In a business or any team context, it means mutual support. Different teams or individuals can't just work in their own little bubbles. They have to understand how they support others and who supports them. It's about interdependence.
So the leader's job is to actively engineer that, making sure people aren't just focused inward on their own tasks, but outward on the collective goal.
Precisely. Identifying those connections, breaking down silos, ensuring that support flows both ways. And a huge part of that is communication, which leads to the next principle. Keep things simple.
Because complexity is the enemy of execution. Always. The source stresses that plans, orders, communication, it all needs to be boiled down to its simplest, clearest form. Complicated strategies get misinterpreted, especially under pressure. Leaders need to be ruthless about clarity. Avoid jargon. Focus on the critical what and why, and then this is key check for understanding. Ask questions. Encourage feedback. If they don't get it, you didn't explain it simply enough.
That makes total sense. And often, especially when things are chaotic, you're facing multiple problems at once. How do you manage that?
Yeah.
The principle here is prioritize and execute.
Right, because the reality is, like the source says, don't try to do everything at once or you won't be successful. You just can't.
So you have to figure out the absolute most critical thing first. How do you even decide that when everything feels like a five-alarm fire? You need a clear filter, usually based on what poses the biggest threat to the overall mission right now. You identify that number one priority. Then you focus resources, attack that problem, solve it or get it under control. Then you move to the next most important thing. And you have to stay flexible, ready to shift priorities if the situation changes.
Like that example you mentioned, website crash, partner bails, competitor move. You can't fix all three instantly. You tackle the one that will kill the mission fastest first.
Exactly that. Disciplined focus. Now, thinking bigger picture, beyond just your immediate team, the source talks about leading within the whole organization. Decentralized command.
Okay, what's the thinking there?
It starts with a practical limit.
Yeah.
The source points out, human beings are generally not capable of managing more than 6 to 10 people, especially when things get intense. Micromanagement just doesn't scale and it stifles initiative.
So you have to empower people down the line, push authority downwards.
Precisely. Give junior leaders the authority to make decisions within defined boundaries, as long as they understand the overall strategic goal, the commander's intent. But this isn't just delegation. It requires actively building leadership skills at all levels. You need competent people you can trust to make those calls.
And all this execution relies on good preparation. The principle of plan.
Yeah, planning is essential. Thinking through contingencies, anticipating challenges. But the source highlights that the best planning isn't top-down. You must involve people at all levels, especially those on the front lines who actually have to execute the plan. They have valuable insights, and involving them builds buy-in, makes the plan much stronger.
And the plan isn't a one-and-done thing, is it? There's that idea of constant learning.
Right. High-performing teams, according to the source, have a disciplined process for debriefing after every operation or project. What worked, what didn't, why. They learn and adapt. It's a continuous cycle. Plan, brief, execute, debrief, repeat.
Okay, now maybe one of the toughest parts of leadership anywhere. Managing upwards, dealing with your boss, maybe their boss. The source calls this leading up and down the chain.
And this is where extreme ownership comes back and bites you again. The book says, if your boss isn't giving you the support you need or not making a decision you're waiting on, don't blame the boss. First, blame yourself.
Wow, okay. That's not the usual reaction, is it? Blame yourself if your boss seems like the bottleneck.
It forces a hard look in the mirror. Did I communicate the urgency clearly? Did I give them all the information they needed concisely? Did I frame the request properly? Did I offer solutions or just dump problems on their desk? Leading up is about proactively managing that relationship, anticipating their needs, and making it easy for them to give you what your team requires for the mission. Leading down is the more obvious part. Clear direction, support, accountability for your team.
That really shifts the power dynamic back to you, focusing on what you can control, your communication, your preparation.
Exactly. Which ties into the reality of making decisions. Decisiveness amid uncertainty.
Because perfect information is a fantasy, right? Especially in fast-moving situations.
Totally.
Yeah.
The picture is never complete, the source says flat out. And often there's no 100% right solution. Leaders just have to get comfortable making calls without knowing everything.
So how do you avoid getting stuck in analysis paralysis, just waiting for more data that might never show up?
It's a trained skill. You gather the best intel you can reasonably quickly. You analyze it, understand the risks, but then you have to act. You make the best call possible with what you have. And then crucially, you stay ready to adjust, to pivot hard if new information comes in or the situation changes. Often, the cost of waiting for perfect information is far higher than the risk of making a good enough decision now and adapting as you go.
Making those calls under pressure, that takes real internal fortitude. Which brings us to maybe the most counterintuitive principle of all. Discipline equals freedom.
Yeah, it sounds like a total contradiction. Discipline feels like constraints, rules, rigidity. Freedom feels like the opposite. But the argument is powerful. By having disciplined routines, habits, standards, thinking, physical training, planning processes, communication protocols, you actually create efficiency and reduce chaos.
Like that example from SEAL training they mention. Having
Uh-huh.
3 alarm clocks, electric, battery, wind up.
Exactly. Seems extreme, but that discipline guarantees you're up. It removes that variable, that potential point of failure. That frees up your mental energy to focus on the real challenges of the mission, not scrambling because you overslept.
So the structure of discipline actually creates the space for flexibility and effective action when things go wrong.
That's the idea. Discipline builds the reliable platform from which you can adapt and overcome the unexpected.
Yeah.
And of course, the leader has to be the most disciplined person in the room. You model the standard.
Okay, wow. We have covered a lot of ground here. From that absolute core of extreme ownership,
Total responsibility.
all the way through to this idea that discipline actually unlocks freedom.
Yeah, we hit extreme ownership as the base. The implication of no bad teams, only bad leaders. The internal stuff like belief versus ego. Then the practical execution. Teamwork with cover and move. Clarity through simple. Focus with prioritize and execute.
Right, and scaling that up. Empowering others via decentralized command, collaborative planning, and managing relationships with leading up and down.
And finally, facing reality. Making calls with decisiveness amid uncertainty. All built on that foundation of discipline equals freedom.
And the thread tying it all together, as the source really hammers home, is that these aren't just military concepts. They're applicable to any team or organization. Business, nonprofits, sports, even family life, arguably.
Yeah, they're presented as tools for developing leaders, improving how teams work together, handling crises, really any situation where people need to achieve a common goal under pressure.
And the source grounds it in real human struggle, doesn't it? The authors talk about their own high-stakes decisions, building trust across different groups, and, importantly, having to face their own mistakes and take that ownership.
Definitely. There's a humility underneath the intensity. The summary we looked at does note the book is generally seen as really thought-provoking, very practical with those examples. Though, yeah, some might find that constant military focus a bit much, or maybe feel the principles are a bit simplified for really complex corporate environments.
Fair enough. But the core message, that shift in mindset it demands, that seems undeniably powerful.
It really is.
So wrapping up this deep dive, we've explored this idea that taking complete, utter responsibility, extreme ownership isn't just a leadership style. It's presented as the fundamental mindset for building effective, high-performing teams anywhere.
Yeah, these are real, actionable concepts about looking inward first, communicating with absolute clarity, making sure teams support each other, staying focused, being disciplined, and managing relationships effectively. It really challenges that blame instinct.
So for you listening, if true freedom really does come from discipline, and truly effective teams start when leaders own absolutely everything, what corners of your world are you still making excuses for? Where are you still pointing fingers? And what could change? What potential could be unlocked if you decided to take extreme ownership? Starting right now.